On this Thursday night, rescues become more rare. Buried for more than 80 hours, the living are still being found, but hope is dwindling in the earthquake zone. Plus, what survivors are forced to endure. The investigation into that Quebec bus driver turned accused murderer, what a neighbor is saying about him. New insight into the Saskatchewan stabbing rampage.
I'm in fear.
What this 911 call reveals.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. There is lots of news to get to tonight. We begin in Turkey and Syria, where as time passes, hope is diminishing. The death toll from the earthquakes is staggering. More than 20,000 people are now known to have died. And as the search enters its fourth night, more bodies are being recovered. Survivors are left with sorrow. One man said there is no family without pain. Each death an individual agony and combined a sea of utter sadness. The sheer scale of the human loss in Turkey and Syria evident in the multiple mass graves that are being dug. And hundreds of thousands of the living are homeless, trying to survive in cold, wintry weather. Tent cities are being erected in stadiums and shattered city centers, and search teams are not giving up, not yet. A 6-year-old boy was buried for almost 80 hours. He tells rescuers his body is aching. He asks for water. They worked for hours and they finally freed him. One victory in a sea of despair. In another part of Turkey, this child was rescued after 83 hours in the rubble. And moments later, the mother emerges too. But as everyone knows, as time passes, moments like these are increasingly rare. Our Jackson Proskow is in one of the hardest hit areas tonight. Jackson.
Donna, the town of Pazarcık is right near the epicenter of the earthquake. Residents tell us that rescue workers only showed up today and aid has been slow to trickle in. Across Turkey, those frantic searches continue, some yielding small miracles, most delivering heartbreak. When the earth shook in Pazarcık, little stood a chance. High-rises were knocked off their foundations, tossed into the street. Buildings crumpled in the middle of the night. Apartment blocks tipped whole onto their sides, leaving behind only traces of the people who once lived inside. Rescuers are only now beginning to search through the rubble here.
Many buildings have collapsed. I cannot say that the aid and the rescue teams have arrived on time. There are still dead bodies under the rubble. There's so much needs for further assistance.
There are also survivors, like this 9-year-old girl found alive in the rubble. Her rescuers were visibly stunned by the discovery. Every so often, the frantic digging stops so that searchers can listen for signs of life. They're increasingly scarce. Each passing moment narrows the odds of another miracle. And when the dead are found, they're buried quickly in mass graves. With a disaster of such scale, there's little time to mourn. The gravity of this event is very deplorable. Doomsday itself, says this man. For the living, desperation is quickly setting in. Crowds gather in the bitter cold for blankets, clothing, and food. They're desperate for anything that will help carry them through. While tents are provided by the government, survivors still have to fend for themselves in makeshift camps. People should be helping each other. There are many injured, many in bad conditions, says this woman. Almost everyone is in need of help. There's no heat and not enough food. Recovery is just a dream for a country still living through a nightmare. Because so many buildings are now uninhabitable, Turkey is undertaking a mass relocation of citizens from the hardest hit areas. By road, rail, and air, tens of thousands of people are on the move to safer parts of the country. Donna?
Jackson Proskow in Pazarcık, Turkey tonight. Thanks. In Syria, things are even more chaotic than Turkey. Millions of people's lives were wrecked by a decade at war. They already relied on aid to survive. Now sanctions against the government of Bashar al-Assad have made getting international aid into Syria complicated. Damage caused by the quake has made transportation difficult, too. Today, the first United Nations aid trucks carrying building supplies and hygiene kits were dispatched. As Ross Lord reports, aid can't get there fast enough.
It took 3 days, but a precious delivery has arrived. Bread and other life-saving supplies. The first since the earthquake leveled parts of northwest Syria that were already devastated by an ongoing civil war.
We've reached nearly 45,000 people through this mechanism within a few days, working through this network of community volunteers and partners.
Millions of people here have relied on humanitarian aid for years amidst the ongoing conflict, many already homeless. Along with the earthquake's growing death toll, there are even more displaced Syrians, sleeping wherever they can and desperate for water and heat in a freezing cold winter. For Syrian refugees who found a better life in Canada, it means more anguish.
My family, they are okay, and they are sleeping in the cars because it's not safe to get back to their houses.
Nadal Izzeddin is connected to the White Helmets, the Syrian volunteer group that's clawing through debris to save lives. As a refugee, he's not permitted to return to his Syrian homeland.
What I'm trying to do, to go back to Turkey to help the White Helmets in the logistics and any support I can provide.
As rescue operations continue, maintaining the flow of relief supplies requires aid agencies to negotiate with multiple parties in conflict zones.
It's going to slow our ability to replenish the stocks, to extend over time when people run out of their early response supplies that we've given them. And that is an area where we are calling on the parties to the conflict to recognize the humanitarian access. Hunger is not a political issue. Hunger is a human issue.
How much and how soon comfort arrives for others is unclear. Ross Lord, Global News.
In Laval, Quebec, a makeshift memorial is growing outside a daycare as people grieve the children who died when a city bus driver drove his bus into the building. Tonight, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the Premier of Quebec, and the Mayor of Laval joined members of the community at a vigil for the 2 children who lost their lives and the 6 others who were injured. There is a little bit of good news. 2 of those injured children were released from the hospital this morning, though as Touria Izri reports, many questions remain about the driver of the bus and what motivated him.
The Laval transit bus that rammed into a daycare and shattered lives was towed away from the crime scene. 2 children, both just 4 years old, were killed in what witnesses describe as an intentional crash. This father was dropping off his 2-year-old son at the time.
We heard the screams and I was the first under the bus.
He rushed in and pulled kids to safety.
Couldn't really see stuff. It was very dark, so I kept screaming for a light, because I wanted to see if I was taking something out that wasn't going to hurt anybody. But it happened so fast. And that last girl that I took out was very hard to take. She was really stuck.
6 children were sent to hospital.
J'étais là 10 minutes avant.
This mother left the daycare just 10 minutes before the moment of impact. Her daughter survived, but the family knew one of the children who did not. Quebec's premier visited a growing memorial at the crash site and tried to comfort families.
I think we don't have to hesitate to get some psychological help. It's important.
The psychological state of the driver is now under sharp focus. Laval Transit bus driver Pierre-Denis Saint-Amand is charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Witnesses say the driver was hysterical, that when he got off the bus, he was naked and screaming incoherently. 4 people wrestled the suspect to the ground before police brought him into custody. This man is Saint-Amand's next-door neighbor.
I used to see him playing with his kids outside. What happened? We should know. Everybody should know.
How this could have happened is one of many lingering questions.
Was he on duty? Was he supposed to work? If not, how did he manage to pick up a bus? And was there a particular event that sort of set off this mechanism?
The Quebec government says there's no evidence at this point he had a mental health disorder or was seeking treatment.
My first question would be, looking back into his history a little bit, do we see that typical pattern of social isolation? Was he really on his own?
For all the confusion and sadness, there are also signs of strength. Hundreds of people are gathered here outside this church in Laval. They're standing shoulder to shoulder in the cold to show their respects, laying flowers and lighting candles in honor of the 2 children who died. Donna?
All right, Touria Izri in Laval, Quebec tonight, thanks. And there is more sad news from Quebec. A fire at a home about an hour's drive north of Montreal has taken a terrible toll. By the time fire crews arrived early this morning, they say the house in Saint-Jacques was destroyed. They initially discovered 4 bodies inside and later found 2 others. Authorities say 2 adults are dead plus 4 children, all of whom are under the age of 8. Neighbors say a family lived in the house, but the identities of the dead have not been confirmed. The provincial police's major crime unit is now investigating. The Ukrainian president's in-person plea coming up, his request and his powerful message to the European Union. Plus, eye in the sky, what the U.S. says Beijing's spy balloon was capable of. Ukraine's president has made a 3rd stop on his first major tour outside his country since Russia's invasion last year. Today he addressed the European Parliament in Brussels, and he was warmly embraced, as he was in Paris and London. But he was there for more than moral support. He wants fighter jets and more weapons. Reggie Cicchini reports.
Greeted with a hero's welcome, Ukraine's president walked towards a future he is adamant his country will reap the benefits of, namely the ideals and security that the European Union offers.
Ukrainians want to live like in the European Union. That means democracy, rule of law, diversity. The strategic objective is clearly set.
Ukraine is the EU is Ukraine. Let's make it happen.
This is Volodymyr Zelensky's first visit to this parliament, where Ukraine is a candidate for membership, but staring down a long road. Free Europe cannot be imagined without free Ukraine, he says. Not lost is the sense of urgency. The coming weeks and months will be crucial. The West is stepping up with more military hardware, and on Tuesday, Volodymyr Zelensky also hinted some EU leaders appear ready to offer aircraft. That would mark a significant turning point, following fears it could draw countries across a Russian red line.
We should not fall into this trap of discussing Russian red lines. We should be discussing the lines of international rule-based order.
Of course, none of that is on an official record, but even a conversation is a testament to how this one man can influence the international community.
I think a lot of this is probably quite personally humiliating for Vladimir Putin, who thinks that he's the one who by rights should be, shaking hands and taking group photos in Brussels.
And while Ukraine's president leaves this trip empty-handed, he won't return home with empty promises. Reggie Cicchini, Global News, Washington.
And Global News will air a special on February 25th to mark 1 year since the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. Senior officials in the U.S. State Department say the Chinese balloon that flew over the U.S. for 8 days was equipped with multiple antennas, likely capable of collecting and geolocating communications. And they say it was part of a larger fleet of surveillance balloons operated by the Chinese military. The U.S. says it is preparing to bring up more fragments of the balloon, much of which remains underwater. It was shot down off the coast of South Carolina. The State Department says China's military is likely behind the surveillance program and that China has flown similar balloons over more than 40 countries across 5 continents. The Chinese government denies that, accusing the U.S. of a campaign of information warfare against China. North Korea's leader oversaw a massive parade of military might on Wednesday night, and by his side was a girl believed to be Kim Jong-un's second oldest child. She is thought to be 9 or 10 years old, and it's the 5th public appearance she's made in 3 months, fueling speculation she could be her father's successor. The parade to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the founding of North Korea's army showcased almost a dozen of what security experts believe are advanced intercontinental ballistic missiles, more than have ever appeared at one of these extravagant parades. Saskatchewan stabbings ahead, what a 911 call reveals about last year's horrific events. It's been 5 months since that violent stabbing rampage in Saskatchewan that left 11 people dead. At the time, Global News reported the wife of one of the men initially considered a suspect, Damien Sanderson, had called the RCMP the day before the murders. Global News has obtained the audio of that 911 call. Reporter Nathaniel Dove explains what's in it and how it sheds new light on the case.
RCMP, bonjour. Are you calling from 306?
Yes.
Leon James Smith?
Yes.
24 hours before the massacre at James Smith Cree Nation and in nearby Weldon, Saskatchewan, Skye Sanderson called for help.
I'm in fear because I have several domestic charges against him and he hasn't been picked up yet.
The 911 call and incident report, obtained by Global News' Ashley Stewart using a Privacy Act request, shows that one day before Miles Sanderson killed 11 people and injured 18, Skye reported Miles's brother Damien, her husband, to RCMP, saying he took her SUV and was known to be violent. Damien spent most of the day before the stabbings with Miles. RCMP say Skye did not mention Miles in her call.
So now he's driving around and I got a couple phone calls from family members that he's harassing them.
Acting on calls with Skye, officers did find her stolen car and they spoke to Damien, but they didn't recognize him and they didn't ask for ID.
The males in the residence were asked to identify themselves. None of them identified as Damien Sanderson. The keys for the stolen vehicle were recovered from inside the residence.
Skye tells Global News she told officers they were using an old photo and that she wishes they double-checked who they were talking to.
And I don't get why they didn't go back and ask for an ID.
A lawyer cautions it's not that simple. Officers can only ask for ID under certain conditions.
The police would have also have to ask themselves, is anyone in danger?
Hillary Peterson says officers likely could have in this case, but says there may have been no need, since they recovered the car keys and no one was apparently at risk. Global News asked RCMP for comment. In a statement, they said the 911 call was released in error and is part of an ongoing active investigation, so we are unable to comment. Skye wishes officers had recognized Damien. She lost her husband and her father in the attack and says they'd still be alive if police did more. Nathaniel Dove, Global News, Saskatoon.
If you want to listen to Skye Sanderson's full 911 call and learn what she knew about the killer's past acts of violence, you can go to our website, globalnews.ca/globalnational.